this gentleman to say a couple of verses in the plan is like the traditional thing of saying that we're going to do this. So we didn't do that.
Oh, it's over there. Okay, sorry.
Oh, you want to put this here? Why not? Yeah, you got the flags. Yeah, why not? We've got some other flags. On the Australian flag.
Fantastic.
Where's the Victorian flag?
Okay, well, welcome everyone. I think before we formally start, because now we have dignitaries and people who will have something to say from Somalia, but as a tradition, we'll start with a bit of a blessing, and it might be interesting for Mel Uni, I guess, to see how we Somalis conduct meetings, as it was. So I will get Abdussalam perhaps to say a few words, please.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم العصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر صدق الله العظيم.
Do you want to just explain what you just said in the Quran? Do you want to say it in English perhaps so we know what you said?
In English.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say English.
No, actually,
Just summarize it.
God has swear. God has actually vowed that Asr is actually the midday, is actually in between 12 to 5 o'clock. So God has actually vowed to that particular time that the human being are very weak and actually lost people, lost servants, not being servants. So he's actually saying, you guys think of tomorrow, not think of today, the next month.
Well, thank you.
So in other words, reduce the time of the meeting.
Well, thanks for that. So what we'll do, I think, without further ado, I'll invite Professor Cyril Chambers to open the meeting. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Look, my name's Cheryl Saunders. For those of you who I haven't met, and for those that I'm meeting for the first time, it's wonderful to have you here. I'm here with my colleagues from the Constitution Transformation Network, and I'll ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves in a moment. But we're very happy to have you here again, both on behalf of ConTransNet and on behalf of Melbourne Law School. We very much enjoy our collaboration with Mohammed, and we very much enjoyed our last meeting with you. Can I just say, we are entirely in your hands for this meeting. You do have a copy of the slides that I can take you through. I can take you through them fast. I can not take you through them at all, whatever you prefer. We've tried to build them in a way that is relevant to the issues that you're presently grappling with in Somalia, and that's on the basis of discussions with Mohammed. But I completely understand that you want to come away from this with outcomes that you can work with yourselves, and the whole purpose of this exercise is to provide whatever assistance we can to that end. So don't hesitate to divert us in midstream and to do whatever you want to do, because this is your meeting, not ours. We're just the resource people. So just to introduce myself, and then I'll go to my colleague at the back, and then around to my other colleagues now, and then we're going to go around you. I'm Cheryl Saunders. I'm a professor of constitutional law in this law school and have been for a long time, and I'm one of the conveners of this group, the Constitution Transformation Network, that is really interested in how constitutions are made and changed and operate over time, and we are interested in that from a global perspective. and we're happy to share whatever knowledge and understanding we have on that front. So Michael, do you want to just briefly say who you are?
Thank you. Like Cheryl, I'm a professor here in the law school, and indeed Cheryl and I have worked together for many years, particularly in the field of constitutional law and federalism more specifically. My other major interest in terms of teaching and research is the management of natural resources, especially mineral and petroleum resources, and I've looked at the arrangements that are adopted for development of those resources in different parts of the world, including other federations like Canada and the United States. So I'll be talking this afternoon about fiscal matters more generally and resources specifically, and the particular challenges that they present in any federal system.
Thank you. And then
Sure. So my name is Anna Jedgetts. I have nearly, fingers crossed, finished my PhD here at Melbourne Law School. I look at courts and judges in the Pacific, but I've worked with Cheryl for nearly 7 years now on all sorts of constitutional questions, including federalism, which I know of interest.
My name is Tom Daly. I focus mainly on constitutional law, and with a particular focus on courts, international courts and national courts. I've worked with the African Union. I focus more broadly on democracy and how the Constitution can be used to support democracy and democracy building.
My name's Charmaine Rodriguez. I'm the coordinator of the network, but before I joined the network, I apologise in advance because I know the UN hasn't been great in Somalia oftentimes, but I worked for UNDP for a number of years, and I actually worked on constitution making in Somalia, but based out of New York from about 2011 to 2016, because I did some of that when I came back. I actually did evaluate that original support that was given in support of the 2012 Constitution. So I am aware of a lot of the problems that happened there, and it's really great to be able to hear directly from you where you're at now and what you're trying to look towards. And I also was, the constitutional specialist at UNDP for a couple of years.
After?
Hi, my name is Aftab Hussain. I'm the Center Administrator for Constitution Transformation Network. Here to help you all.
Now, most importantly, the actual participants. As last time, we thought it might be nice if people not only introduce themselves, but if there's any particular issues that you think we should be discussing today, if you want to put them on the table as we go around, that would be helpful, but don't feel that you have to. Jamaica, can we start with you?
My name is Hassan Chama. I am the producer of Somali language at SBS Radio. I guess I want to know why Somali Constitution has been there for a long time, but it has been always called provisional. So why it's not fully implemented, and also how you can overcome the major sticking points, including resource sharing, borders, and also there are some states in Somalia who call themselves independent from Somalia, and that's one of the sticking points as well. So I just want to know generally why we're still in a provisional mode and why we couldn't move on.
Yeah, great, thanks.
My name is Abdi Ali. I lived here for a long time and I did many different things, but at the moment I run a transport company, which is take care of insuring, take care of maintenance, and whether it's polio or kind of things. It's called Awesome. It's Australian or Somalian club. I'm new to this. I'm not an expert for the constitution and laws and this, but I'll just see how things goes.
Stick around.
And if there is
a window of opportunity, I'll jump it in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Ahmed Noor. I act as a freelance consultant here in Melbourne. My background is in economics and finance. I had working experience with the Somali government in the past and most recently in the public finance area. And also a short stint with about 6 years with UN and another 10 years with OSAID here in Canberra. I'm currently in Melbourne and look forward to go back to Somalia in the near future to see how things are going.
Great, thank you.
Yes, my name is Absalam Ahmed. I came Melbourne just for this event. Because this really is very important as a Somalis for us. And this constitution, it seems like, as we see some of us, taking quite some time to finalize it, to make it final. So there are a couple of areas, of course, that I would like to see or to know more how other countries are doing, like resource sharing, power sharing, all those kind of things. So I am here, of course, to listen to the experts. And also, I must say that we appreciate and thankful for this institution, this university, particularly this institution, to help us, to give us their expert advice, let me say. And hopefully that will be something, and their contribution here will be, we hope will be useful to finalize this constitution.
Okay.
So I am here to listen, of course, the experts these couple of coming hours and see how it goes. So thank you very much again for organizing this event and also those experts who are going to say something or contribute on this thing. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Jama Abdi. I'm a businessman, background businessman. Spend most of my time in Indonesia and China, all those things. And I'm one of the secretary of NGO who helps back Somalia. And it's my first time in this seminar. I'm willing to listen you very carefully and know more about Somali Constitution.
Thanks, Professor. My name is Abdurrahman El Ibrahim, actually former Deputy Prime Minister of Somalia. I just came for this forum to see what I can contribute or what I can get from them. Everything of them I wanted to say has been already said by the colleagues. But during my presentation, I'll see what I intended to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a great introduction.
My name is Badal Abdullah, even though it says here my name is Badal Ahmed.
My mistake, my mistake.
Written my mistake.
I used to say that.
I'm a member of Somali community here in Melbourne. I lived here for 15 years. I'm also human resources professional. I came here today to look at what are the issues we have in Somalia. And what on this constitution, it's been dragging on for a long time. I just want to hear from you about how it will be. Thank you very much.
Mustafa.
My name is Mustafa Ibrahim, so just pretty much that's whatever I already said. So I'm serving the Somali community and been here for quite a while. So I'm here to pretty much learn and the Somali Constitution form. So I'm here to hear what the experts say and see what I can do.
Great. Okay, thank you all very much. That's been very helpful. And a number of you suggested that you'll comment when it's relevant, and I hope that you will indeed do that. Mohammed, do you want to say anything about objectives?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, welcome all. Thank you very much. I guess the new faces, and some people were here before in the earlier forum. So this time, as you can see, we tried to engage the Somali business community, mainly because they're the people with the money, so we want them to help. So although from academic, they might not have in-depth understanding of these issues, but nevertheless there's interest from their side, and there are more of them who will learn or join us in that. But today's, I guess, meeting, we're really focusing on, it's a follow-on or follow-up from the last meeting, and we're trying to somehow come up with a conclusion and some ideas the way forward for Somali Constitution. The theme or the main message we all talked about the last few days and even before that, there's a feeling that the Somali Constitution, instead of helping us move forward, it's becoming a problem in itself. And everyone is using it for whatever reason they want to use. Anything that we cannot achieve, people will just point the finger to the Constitution. So whereby the thinking was we have a Constitution and it will help us move forward, it's becoming the scapegoat. And one way or another we need to cross that and say, look, there's really nothing new about Constitution. Many countries, or almost every country has a Constitution. And one way or another it's working. And if it doesn't work, it's not something that came from God or we have to, it's not a sacred text, but we human beings wrote and we can change it. So the intention really today is to discuss those issues that you all mentioned and any other issues that come up, but really focusing on the way forward. How do we get our government, how do we get as a Somali community a constitution that we can say is final, we all agree, and even if it's not the final, at least that's working and we can accept the idea that we can change and revise and just move forward. Instead of just saying it's closed shop, our problem or our issues are the constitution and it just becomes an excuse for not moving forward. There are certain areas that are more important than others. So what I thought was, instead of covering lots of things and just doing this superficially, if we can only focus on really the showstoppers, the ones that are really the obstacle, what is it that's stopping us? And we talked about them, I think there are 2 or 3 that are really major problems. Even in the last session, there were in length were discussed, and a lot of you commented last night and yesterday about the video you watched about Professor Michael, and it's been explained well. So today, hopefully, we can get a summary of that. And the outcome we want from this is some document or some idea that we can then share with our folks back home, the government, and say, look, this might help. That's really the objective. Now, how do we do it? I guess it's all of us to see. Yes, we've got a very busy schedule, but again, I think we can look at it and see if there are areas that we're more interested than others. In other words, we can revise and move on. So that's really what I wanted to say, and with that, we can start.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Can I just add to what Mohammed just said? So, he and I had a very interesting talk the other day about what were, from his point of view, really the things that were stopping progress in Somalia. And we've tried to develop the agenda in a way that fits around those. So, if you look at the outline, there are a number of discrete sessions and we've allocated times to those, but we're not stuck by those times. We can move fast forward things or we can slow things down depending on whether we're talking about issues that are relevant from your point of view. Mohammed just mentioned that we were going to engage in some of the basics, but I'm conscious of the fact that you're probably as familiar with the basics as I am. So that first substantive session, what we've named session 2, Essentials of Federalism, we'll take us through those slides, but quite quickly, unless they're relevant to you. And one of the reasons for that is just to set the scene for the discussion about the Constitution. One of the slides in that part, for example, says, why have a federation? And why have federalism at all? And I think it's helpful to think about that from the perspective of any one country, because that helps to guide you as to how you design it and how you gauge whether it's successful or not. So let's sort of do the basics, but do them as quickly as you like. But then we move on to some of the more operational matters that you've been talking about. And if I could just briefly say something about the issue of the provisional constitution that a number of you raised as we were going around the room. I mean, Mohammed said, for example, that Constitution as a scapegoat, the Constitution as a problem in itself. And you know, it could be a problem in itself simply because it's provisional. And if that's the problem, we'll make it final and get on with it. It could be a problem in itself as well because there's bits in it that aren't satisfactory. And if that's the issue, then let's identify those bits in the course of the day. And it's really using that sort of early scene setting stuff that might fit into that argument. Or it could be a problem because it's not working in practice, that the Constitution itself is not too bad. No constitution's perfect anyway. But that's what's really going on is the practical implementation operation of the Constitution. And if that's the problem, it would be helpful to identify that today as well. And that's really the purpose of that what we've got it named, numbered session 3, the challenges of making a federation work. There's always challenges in implementing a new constitution. It's a big issue. And we've actually distributed to you as well another document that we've recently put together.
Sorry,
We'll worry about it later, but it's a document on the problems of implementing a federal constitution. And so I want to touch on those in that session 3. And then as we move on to the remaining sessions, we have one on revenue and resources, which a number of you mentioned, and Michael will take that. And then there's a sort of a catch-all session on anything else about the Constitution you might want to talk about. And then finally, let's come back and look at the provisional Constitution itself and try and pull all of this together. So that's the general scheme for today. Does that sound more or less sensible?
Yeah, that's good.
Everyone happy with that? All right, well, let's move into it and not waste any more time in that case. So we're now starting on this session 2, Essentials of Federalism. That's just an overview of all the sessions. You've got copies of the slides here, and so I won't take you through that particularly. But this session, Essentials of Federalism, I want to take you quickly through these issues. What is federalism anyway? Why have it? What are the key features? What are the main options for dividing power? How do you deal with disputes? And then maybe we can break them for a bit of discussion about the Somali context, if that seems like a useful. Oh, every time something goes wrong, I call on my colleague. So, what is a federation? Of course, in a federation there are at least 2 levels of government, the centre and the constituent states. I'm going to call them here today the centre and the states, but of course they're called all sorts of different things in federations around the world. There may be other levels of government as well, but let's not bother too much about that today unless you want to go there. A distinguishing feature of federalism is that each of those levels of government deals directly with the people or a section of the people in a way that makes them accountable to the people and delivers for the people. I mean, that's a critical aspect of federalism. If you don't have that, you don't have federalism. Third point, which really follows from the second, each of those levels of government has autonomy in the exercise of the powers given to it. Final authority. That's what makes them responsible and accountable to the people. Next point down, the point about accountability. And then the final point, the idea that federalism involves both self-rule and shared rule. I don't know if you've been told this a million times, you probably have, but I think it's useful to think about when you're thinking about federal design. Everybody knows that federalism involves dividing power, so that the constituent units have self-rule to a certain extent. They govern themselves. But they also govern themselves collectively through the centre. And this idea of shared rule is also extremely important, and how you achieve it. Do you achieve it through institutions that all the constituent units trust? Do you do it through institutions in which the constituent units share? Do you do it through just some collaboration through the centre on the part of all the constituent parts of the Federation. So this little mantra of self-rule and shared rule, people trot out all the time, but it's actually quite an important way of thinking about what federalism is. Now, this slide, and this is one we didn't do last time, and I just sort of thought about it today. You know, why have a federation? There's 194 countries in the world, and only about 25 of them self-define as federations. They happen to be big countries, but that's the reality. And so why have federation? And the answer is that different countries have different reasons for having a federation, and those reasons probably change over time. For example, Australia is a federation because originally that was the only way of creating a single country. That was the only basis on which those states would have come together. But now, if I look and say, why is Australia a federation? And Michael and I have written on this, because it's so big. And that's the only way to have genuine democracy in a country of this geographical size. And so there are different reasons for federalism. And I think it might be useful for thinking about it because it enables you to test the quality of your own federation against the reasons for having it in the first place. So what I've put on the screen here are just some of the most obvious reasons. Federalism is a way of governing a state with a diverse population organised along territorial lines, which is effectively the situation in Somalia. It's a way, and even more, another reason which I don't have up there, if there is some conflict within that state, again, federalism is another way of trying to dampen down the conflict. But federalism is also a way of dispersing power and resources that otherwise would be centred in a single part of the country. Mogadishu in your case, but look at all the aspiring federations around the world. One of the reasons why they want federalism in Nepal is to try and get the power and resources out of Kathmandu. One of the reasons they're talking about federalism in the Philippines is to try and get the power and resources out of Manila. So this is a very common reason for thinking about a decentralised state. Federalism is a form of state building. If you're bringing together or working with regions that have not previously functioned as a state, to create them as a federation may be a sense of building a sense of a state. Federalism is simply a way of governing large states. Impossible to imagine the Americas and the Canadas and the Indias and the Russias and the Australias of this world across large territorial areas really functioning in any sort of responsive democratic way unless they were organised along federal lines with multiple centres of government around the country. Federalism is a way of deepening democracy. Federalism simply is a check and balance. I mean, we all know that if you concentrate power absolutely in a single person or even a single part of the country, that may be problematic, and federalism forces that to break down if the federation is working properly. So, just food for thought. I don't know whether you have views about why you have federalism in Somalia, but I think that may be a fruitful thing to discuss at some stage. Key features of a federation really fall out of that earlier slide about what a federation is. You need a constitution, which can generally a constitution which can't be changed simply by one level of government, because that would be sort of counterintuitive. That constitution needs to set up 2 levels of government, at least 2 levels of government, with some protection from the constitution, each of which has its own institutions, its own legislature, its own government, maybe other institutions. Generally also the constitution will sort out the problems of boundaries, which you mentioned as we were going around the room earlier, or at least provide a mechanism for sorting out the problem of boundaries. The constitution a federal constitution needs to divide legislative and executive power between these levels of government. It might also divide judicial power. Federations are different as far as that's concerned. But at least legislative and executive power are divided. Hello, welcome. We're just going through some of the basics of federalism. A constitution, a federal constitution needs to provide for participation by the states or regions in central institutions. This is the shared rule idea that I mentioned a little while ago. Traditionally, that's done through the second chamber of a bicameral legislature at the centre, but I don't think that needs to be the only way it's done. You can have the states participating in composing the constitutional court, for example. You can insist that the cabinet represents the states in a reasonable sort of way. There's all sorts of ways in which the states might feed into central institutions. And then the final essential feature, really, of a constitution. Hello, nice to see you again. Hello, everybody. I'm just doing essentials of federalism. You've come at the right time. The last point, disputes will certainly break out in any federal system, just as they break out in any state. But in a federal system, you can see why there might be reasons for disputes, an additional category of disputes. You need a system for resolving those. The usual system is a court of some kind, and we'll talk about what kind in a moment. There are other mechanisms for doing it. The Swiss use a referendum, the Ethiopians use that federal council, their second chamber, but the usual mechanism is some sort of court, but there's lots of different ways of designing it. So those are the key features of a federation, and when we're thinking later about the provisional constitution of Somalia, we might say, well, how does that reflect these various things that you would expect to find in a federal constitution? This slide is just to get you thinking about other aspects of federalism. Building a federal constitution is not just about ticking off the list of institutions and things that you need. It's got some cultural elements as well. However the federations run, it needs to give all groups a sense that they own the state. I have a Swiss colleague who says that to me. You don't have a real federation unless everybody thinks that they really own a bit of it. That's one of the reasons why we have federalism in Switzerland. It follows from the design of a federation, two levels of government, each of which represents the people. If that's what you've got, there needs to be mutual respect between those levels of government, as befits institutions that represent the people, and they need to collaborate, at least to some extent. Many federal constitutions provide for intergovernmental cooperation. The Provisional Constitution of Somalia's got a nice little motherhood statement in there about cooperating. But you know, cooperation doesn't mean anything until you start putting it into practice, and you really do try and bring these ideas of mutual respect to bear. Easier said than done, I understand that. Federal constitutions generally provide for the redistribution of revenue. Most federal constitutions, with the United States as an exception, try to distribute revenue in a way that equalises conditions around the country, at least to some degree. It's a big feature in Australia, for example. Federal systems need to protect minorities within states and regions, and then many federal systems also are set up in a way where each of the states has its own constitution. And where that happens, then you need to think about what's in the state constitutions as opposed to what's in the national constitution, and how the state constitutions are made. Now, this is just a slide on dividing power, and again, if you've talked about this to your blue in the face at home, I apologise, but let me just make some of the key points and we can come back to this if these are still issues for you, which in a way Mohammed and I thought they might be, but we can come back to that. So as I said earlier, to divide power in a federation, you need to think about legislative power, which is what everybody always thinks about, but you also need to think about executive power, the power to administer legislation, to make policy, to enter into contracts, to do all those sorts of things. At least those two sorts of powers need to be divided in a federation. Whether you also divide judicial power is up to you. Very different practice around the world. While you're thinking about how to divide power, you also need to consider the powers to tax and borrow and manage resources. I've only singled them out on this slide because they're regarded as so important in many federations, and certainly they're important in Somalia, and that's why we've got a special session on it. But really, that's just another aspect of dividing power. You divide power over business and intellectual property and migration and whatever, and so you divide power over tax and resources as well. But they are very, very important powers, so we will single them out. This third dot point may be a little bit more obscure, but it is very important. When you're considering the division of powers, ask yourself whether you want your states to be able to implement central or federal legislation as well as their own. Some federations do that. Germany's an example, India's another. Some federations don't. Australia's an example. So it's quite a major design difference between federations. Each of the levels of government passes legislation, fine. But in some federations, the states also administer the central legislation, or a lot of the central legislation. And that has a lot of implications for the way the federation works in practice. If you look at the federations of the world, there are very different ideas about who should do what. All I'm suggesting in this fourth dot point is that you apply this principle of subsidiarity. Again, your constitution uses this term that's easy to use, a bit harder to apply. But it really just means that power should be assigned to the level of government where it can best be exercised. Of course, you can have an argument about which is the level of government at which some powers can best be exercised. Big argument about tax powers, for example. But I'm suggesting here that one way of resolving that problem might be to say, well, what's the purpose of having a federation in the first place? Can that help us to identify which powers should be exercised at the centre and which should be exercised at the subnational level in accordance with the principles of subsidiarity? And then this final dot point is just the technical stuff. Once you decide who you want to do what, then there's all sorts of federal type tools for actually doing that in a constitution. You decide whether powers are exclusive or whether both levels of government should be able to exercise it. You decide what to do if two levels of government exercise the same power at the same time. How do you resolve that conflict? And you decide what to do with any power that you haven't thought to put in the constitution, so it's a residual power. Which level of government gets that power? But I don't think we should worry too much about the technicalities. They can always be sorted out. You need to know that those tools exist, but it's really the other stuff that's important. Who should do what and why? And then finally, the issue of dealing with disputes. And this is obvious, I know. As we said earlier when we were looking at that earlier slide, all federations need to provide some mechanism for dispute resolution. Many federations, including your own, have nice statements in them saying you should avoid disputes and you should cooperate to avoid disputes, and that's fine. Of course, that's all important. But the reality is that some disputes won't be resolved that way, and in any event, you're more likely to cooperate if you know there is a dispute resolution mechanism at the end of the tunnel. And that mechanism is usually a court of some kind. The court needs to be impartial. Crucially, it needs to be a court that both levels of government trust, because otherwise, why would they go to it? And then once you work out how to essentially achieve that, there are plenty of options. The two main options are you use the ordinary court system, which is what happens in Australia, or you establish a special constitutional court, which is what's supposed to happen in Somalia, but it also happens in, say, Germany, South Africa, Austria, all sorts of federations. And if you're going to establish a special constitutional court and use that for dispute resolution, then there will be a whole range of questions about how you appoint people to it, whether the states have any share in doing that, how long the terms of the members will be, how you take disputes to the court. You know, again, these are all technical questions that need to be resolved, but the big issue is having such a court in the first place. So that's really it for the essentials. Quickest run through the essentials of federalism I've ever done, so I hope I didn't leave you gasping in my wake. But does anybody want to pick up any of those issues from the Somali point of view? And just any questions, issues, whatever?
I guess my question is, once the state has a constitution, if there was change within that constitution, does it always have to reflect it with the federal? Do they have to make sure that it doesn't contradict it with the federal constitution?
Look, different states do that differently. So, of course, you need a rule somewhere that the state constitution doesn't conflict with the federal constitution. In order to put that rule into effect, you might, and in some federations they do, and I think South Africa might be an example, you might say that the change needs to be approved at the federal level, just to check. But the normal way of doing it would be to say, well, that's just another conflict. You know, if you've got a rule in the Constitution that says the state constitution can't be in conflict with the federal constitution, and the state amends its constitution to conflict with the federal constitution, well, that's a conflict that you take to the court. That's the way it happens in Australia. Victoria can amend its constitution as often as it likes, and would never occur to us to ask the Commonwealth. In fact, that would probably be a dreadful thing to do. But if there was a conflict with the Commonwealth Constitution, it would just go to the High Court, and the court would sort it out. So there's different ways of handling that problem.
Mo just passed me a note earlier, and with your permission, if you don't mind,
yes, please.
Perhaps we can give you your question, but also if you can add your suggestions.
Might not be related or appropriate to this. All I wanted was discussing with Muhammad was there are a number of issues called so-called pending issues in this provisional constitution, and I thought when we are drafting something, we should be referring to the most important ones of them, like the power sharing, revenue sharing, responsibilities, power sharing and responsibilities, and other issues that we consider as urgent to be resolved. There are some of them, I believe, not so urgent to resolve. For example, the status of Mogadishu. We can maybe, that's my personal view, we can defer this to another time, but most of the others need to be resolved for the Federation to work properly.
Okay. Well, both power sharing, and I assume you mean institutional power sharing?
Yes.
Power sharing at the centre?
Yes.
We can
Centre and the states, yeah.
Huh?
Centre and the
Oh,
states.
between the centre and the states. Wow.
Yeah.
See the power sharing and revenue sharing
Yes.
are issues everywhere. You need to be able to pinpoint what the actual problem is. So, you know, your idea of power sharing between the centre and the states is just my division of powers.
Division of powers,
Either,
yeah.
either way,
Yes, yeah.
it's power sharing
Yes.
or somehow sharing out power. So what are the particular problems with power sharing?
In the Constitution, there is a list of 24 functions, out of which only 7 are assigned to the states, and the rest to the center.
Yeah, and which section?
Oh,
Sorry, no, I did look, I promise.
Commissioners,
Functions and
24 commissioners.
commissions. Yes, yes. Which section is that? Let me see.
See, 54.
54, yeah.
Well, I don't know if I've got a different version of the Constitution. The version I've got in section 54 doesn't have.
Oh, that's allocation of powers. 54 is allocation of powers.
Yes, 54 is allocation of powers. My version, maybe I've got the wrong one, the allocation of powers and resources shall be negotiated and agreed upon by the federal government and the federal member states, except in matters concerning the following 4 matters, which shall be powers and responsibilities of the federal government. Is that right?
Yeah. 54, I think 54 lists the 7, I'm not sure whether I counted properly, the 7 functions assigned to the federal, to the main, let me find that.
Right, Ahmed,
Yes.
is this a revision that's been passed recently? I remember when you were last here, there'd been a recommendation around 24 powers.
Yes.
It'd been in a CDI or like a document